The Fall 2020 Hinkle, Pryor, and Fisher Parent Empowerment Conference. Realities for a New Reality. 2 days, 25 workshops, renowned speakers and presenters, by families, for families, nearly 40 hours of unfiltered and straightforward information, made possible by the leaders in disability rights advocacy for over 45 years, Hinkle, Pryor, and Fisher, attorneys at law. So welcome to this session of our ongoing encore presentation series of the Fall 2020 Hinkle, Pryor, and Fisher Parent Empowerment Conference.
Okay, welcome and thank you for attending the Hinkle, Pryor, and Fisher Virtual Parent Empowerment Conference. My name is Tina James. I'm an attorney here at the firm, and I will be your moderator today for this presentation entitled The Neuropsychological Evaluation, a Psycholegal Approach to Assessments. Our presenter for this session is Dr. Eric Dranoff. Before we begin, we ask that all participants mute their microphones throughout the session. This workshop will last 1 hour, and if time allows, the presenters will take questions. Please ask your questions through the chat feature in the control bar, and I will ask as many of them as I can, time permitting. If you have not already done so, I highly encourage you to sign up for tonight's keynote address delivered by the former New Jersey Supreme Court Justice Helen E. Holmes, entitled Autism After COVID, Navigating a World Where Everything Has Changed and Nothing Changed. Justice Holmes is also the parent of an adult child with autism and will provide a unique perspective on the times in which we live. She is both an inspiring person and an inspirational public speaker, and you won't want to miss out on this event. It is now my pleasure to welcome our presenter. Dr. Eric Dranoff is a licensed psychologist who divides his professional time and focus between clinical practice, professional service, teaching, and research. His clinical practice is focused in the areas of psychological, neuropsychological, and forensic evaluation for children, adolescents, and adults. Dr. Dranoff's approach to assessment is comprehensive, scientifically driven, and adheres to the highest practice and ethical standards in the field of professional psychology. Dr. Dranoff graduated with highest honors in psychology from Rutgers University and then went on to complete his PhD in clinical psychology from Fairleigh Dickinson University. During his doctoral training, he obtained a strong foundation in the area of psychological assessments with children, adolescents, and adults at Four Winds Hospital and specialized training in neuropsychological psychology at rehabilitation specialist. Dr. Dranoff completed his pre-doctoral internship at Woodhull Medical and Mental Health Center in Brooklyn, New York, where he received broad training with an inpatient and outpatient hospital population. His doctoral program and internship training are both fully accredited by the American Psychological Association. After Dr. Dranoff earned his doctorate, he completed the postdoctoral fellowship at the Northern Regional Diagnostic Center for Child Abuse and Neglect within Hackensack Medical Center, where he obtained specialized training in the area of forensic mental health assessment. As part of the fellowship year, Dr. Dranoff completed the postdoctoral certificate program in family, civil, and criminal forensic psychology at Montclair State University. In addition to his clinical work, Dr. Dranoff is invested in teaching and research. He holds an academic appointment at Seton Hall University, where he teaches a wide range of undergraduate classes. Complementing his teaching responsibilities, Dr. Dranoff conducts research in the area of judgment and decision-making in adolescents for the prevention of bullying, sexual harassment, and violence. Dr. Dranoff is highly committed to advancing and protecting the integrity of the profession of psychology. He is an active member of the New Jersey Psychological Association and is a board member of the Committee of Legislative Affairs. Dr. Dranoff frequently attends political events and meetings aimed at advocating for the interests of New Jersey psychologists and other mental health professionals. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Dranoff to our presentation this afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And thank you for telling people about my background. Actually, a lot of that stuff right now I've kind of moved away from. So I'm no longer teaching these days, and I'm really focused in doing a wide range of evaluations, including neuropsychological evaluations. So my practice is very broad, but it's really focused right now in doing evaluations. And you know how most psychologists, they do some sort of psychotherapy. I don't really do any psychotherapy. It's all assessment. And my goal today is to really do some education around procedures in assessments. So when people are looking for an evaluator to go to really understand what the evaluator needs to do in a legal context, regardless of what the case is. So my practice, I've been practicing in criminal, in civil, in family court, and the approach that I use is always the same, even if it's a disability evaluation. And my concern would be is if you're going into an evaluator who's not really using a multi-method approach to collecting information. That's what I wanted to talk about today, is my approach to assessments, particularly neuropsychological assessments in the context of individuals with disabilities, whether they're a child, an adolescent, or an adult. And let's see how many people we have in here today. I can't really see it because my screen is shared. How many people are in the presentation?
We are up to 11 participants, and so we may have a couple others joining us, but
because we're a small group, I really encourage everyone to, if you have a question, ask. I like to make this more of like a roundtable as opposed to just some kind of lecture. So I'm going to go over some foundational things in the beginning, but as we get going, please, ask some questions and we can have a conversation about it. So let's talk about the neuropsychological evaluation. So in this context, we're really looking at disability benefits and disability determinations. And what we're really looking at is a condition that's expected to last 1 year or longer or result in death. So we want to know, what is the condition that the person has? And if you're going to a psychologist, the conditions that you're really looking at in terms of disability are primarily neurodevelopmental or neurocognitive. So a neurodevelopmental condition is something that you were born with generally. It can be speech and language delays, learning disabilities, ADHD. Think about it in terms of the hardware. Something is kind of not working so much with the hardware, as opposed to something like depression, which might be more a software issue, right? The hardware is working, but things have happened in the environment that make the person depressed. So when I'm looking at conditions regarding disability, I'm really looking at the neurodevelopmental condition, whether it's been going on for a long time and dates back to the childhood, or a neurocognitive, meaning it's acquired over some period of time. The best example I could think of a neurocognitive disorder is a brain injury. So you get into an accident and you have a brain injury, and before that, you didn't really have any problems. That would be more of a neurocognitive disorder. Cognitive problems related to cancer, a stroke, a heart attack, all these things would be neurocognitive. Okay, and children, adolescents, and adults can have a neurocognitive disorder. It doesn't mean that you have to be older to have that. So as you're going through life, something happens to you that results in some kind of condition. So what is your condition? And then when did your condition begin? So did it begin a couple months ago, or have you had this over the course of your life? Have you had some kind of impairment? Okay. And how has your condition limited your activities? So what is the functional impairment of the problem that you're particularly having? And I'm always looking at the impact, and impact really falls into 3 different categories. So you want to see academic impact. So for children, is it interfering with your academic functioning? Are you having trouble in Hello?
you first. You first for a second.
Oh, strange.
So,
Let's see if I can get back on here.
and it was right at the part that you were talking about impact, and you started on the
Yeah.
academic impact.
Okay. Might have something to do with putting this on full screen. So I'm going to keep it off of full screen for now. So how has your condition limited your activities? So are you unable to perform, academic functions, social functions, activities of daily living, which we'll get into in a little bit? So what is the functional impairment of your condition? So if you have an autism spectrum disorder, when did it begin? And then how has it impacted your academic and your social functioning? That is really what you want to start to look at in that relationship. Okay. They also want to know whether the results of any testing. And it's interesting because people think of the neuropsychological evaluation as testing, but I only think of the neuropsychological testing as 20% of the evaluation. And I'll explain to you a little bit about why. And then the fifth thing that people want to know in the legal context is, what treatment have you received? So what is your condition? When did it begin? How has it impaired you? Is it supported by any testing? And are you having to get some kind of treatment because of that? And is the treatment helping improve your functioning? That's really the legal context. Those are the questions that you want to answer. So how does a psychologist go about answering these questions? So in any evaluation that has a legal context, whether it's a child study team evaluation, or it's a disability evaluation with Social Security, or it's a child custody case or a personal injury case, you're going to view this as a forensic evaluation, meaning it's a psycho-legal evaluation. So it's not for just the purpose of people knowing about their mental health, for their own basic knowledge. It's also for a specific legal question. You want to answer a legal question. And the one thing I've learned over the years is when I go to court and I testify in a case, they don't just want to know about my evaluation of that person. They want to know that I've corroborated this information from other sources. So the biggest mistake that a psychologist can do in any type of forensic evaluation is just talk to the person and give them tests. I think that is a fundamental mistake that people can make. What you want to do instead is you want to use a multi-method approach to data collection. You want to see things across a bunch of different data sources. And the more data you have, the stronger your opinion is going to be. So the first method of data collection is always record review. Okay? If you're going into any type of evaluation and you want to provide information to the evaluator that's going to help in any, to help a court or a legal decision maker make a decision, you want to provide as many records as you can. And the records fall into a couple different contexts. Any legal records, any educational records, or any mental health records. So if there's a determination of disability that you had in the past, that would be an important record to know, because at some point, someone made a decision that you had a disability. If you were in a multiply disabled classroom as a child, those records would be extremely important, because if you're in a multiply disabled classroom as a child, they're saying that you had a disability within the school, and it's very likely that you would also have a disability as an adult. If you had an individualized education plan as a child, that would be a really important record to document this particular disability, which would fall into, usually into either an ADHD or a specific learning disability diagnosis. Any type of mental health records. So if you went to a social skills class or course, those records would be really important, and anything that a mental health professional provided to you. If you went to therapy, the notes from the therapist would be really important. If you've been to a previous evaluation that documented your functioning in some way, or a child's functioning in some way, that would also be really important to know. Think about how much information you get from the record review alone about a person's disability, especially if they have a long history of having problems that would suggest they have a disability or some kind of neurodevelopmental disorder or neurocognitive disorder. Any questions so far at all? Any thoughts about that? Okay. So clinical interviewing. You're going to want to interview the person. You're going to want to talk to them about their psychosocial history, about their academics functioning, about their family functioning, about their social functioning, what they like to do, and what they have trouble doing. And you're just going to talk to the person you're evaluating, whether the person you're evaluating is an 8-year-old or a 42-year-old or a 78-year-old. You're going to talk to them and you're going to gather information about their perspective. Right? Now, the third method of data collection, which I think is one of the most important things in any type of forensic evaluation, is the collateral witness interviews. Meaning, talking to people who know this person, teachers, mental health professionals, parents, other types of caregivers. And this really gives you a lot of information about the person's functioning. So I've been in interviews with people who are clearly have a intellectual disability, and they don't say that they have any problems, everything is fine. But if you talk to the parents, and you talk to the teachers, and you talk to any type of mental health professionals, they're going to tell you about the deficits, okay? And that speaks volumes that this person is saying, oh, everything is fine. Well, actually it's not if we talk to the collateral witnesses and we review records. Notice we haven't even gotten into any testing, yet we really have formulated a lot about the person at this point. Before we even start giving tests to the person, we're going to give rating scales to the collateral witnesses. So we're going to give a rating scale to mom and dad. We'll give a rating scale to the teacher. And that rating scale is going to look at a variety of functional behaviors. So that's the first test that you're really giving, and that's the first psychometric testing data that you get. And it usually falls into adaptive functioning or psychological functioning. And we'll talk a little bit about those categories in a little bit. The next method is the neuropsychological testing. So after collecting information about through records, through interviewing, you're going to start to give some tests. And the testing falls into a couple of different categories. You have cognitive testing, which consists of general reasoning, attention, memory, executive functioning, effort, and psychological symptoms. And now you get more objective measures of intellectual functioning, which is going to be very important to determining the person's overall level of functional impairment. The fifth method is direct observation. So typically, you're going to get the observations of the person in the session. You're going to kind of see how they interact with you, see how they do on the testing and their behavior. If you really want to go to the next level, is you would actually see them in a functional setting. You would either go to their school or you would see them at work. Typically, that's not done in most evaluations, but if you really want to increase the validity and reliability of the information that you're providing, you would want to see the person at work. What kind of job do they have? And how are they functioning at the job? You would want to see it directly. So after you do all of this, all these methods of data collection, you really get a good sense of the person and what's going on with them. So we talked a little bit about this before. Individuals with disabilities, you want to look at their cognitive functioning, their adaptive functioning, their academic functioning, and their psychological symptoms. So with cognitive functioning, we're looking at reasoning, attention, memory, and executive functioning. And people think this is just through testing, but you're also going to get this through review of records, through talking to people, through just your general observations of the person. You're going to get some initial impressions of how they are, and then you're going to corroborate that through formal psychological testing. Any questions so far?
I haven't had any yet, but folks, if you have questions and you want to go ahead and ask them in the chat feature, you can do so. And Dr. Dranoff had said that it's also it's okay that somebody unmutes themselves if they have a question? Is that okay?
That's
Or
totally fine. We're in a very small group
Small.
here, and I think it would be helpful if people, had any questions. Feel free to ask, because there's a lot of nuances with this kind of work. Okay. So the next area you're really looking at is adaptive functioning. Okay. So adaptive functioning is really important part of the assessment, because that is the functional impairment. People with adaptive functioning really have problems living in the community independently. And if you have problems living in the community independently, you're probably going to have trouble working independently. And what you would want to see is whether that is recent or there's been a history of these problems throughout the person's life, which you're really going to get through records and the collateral interviews. The adaptive functioning usually comes in one of the rating scales that's completed by a collateral witness. So you're going to give them a very long rating scale that looks at communication, daily living, and interpersonal functioning. So with the testing, you have the cognitive functioning and you have adaptive functioning. Now, not everyone does this, but I like to do it. Academic functioning. I like to give a full academic battery of tests, because if the person has academic problems, it's going to speak to the type of job that they're able to have as an adult. So if they have problems in reading, or they're really not good at math, or they have problems in writing, it's going to impact their ability to sustain or obtain gainful employment. The type of job that they're able to have is going to be very different than if they're reading, math, and writing are as good as everybody else. Okay. The next method is psychological symptoms. So you're really looking at the personality functioning, and if they have any other psychological symptoms that are on top of all of their cognitive problems. So any depression, bipolar related conditions, a psychosis, sometimes anxiety disorders, or trauma related conditions. And all of these conditions will further impact the person's adaptive functioning, cognitive functioning, and impact them in academic and their social functioning. So when I'm doing the evaluation, what I'm looking for, the first thing I'm looking for is whether there's a presence of a neurodevelopmental disorder. So I'm looking at the early functioning of the person. And regardless if the person is a child, adolescent, or adult, I'm looking at whether or not this person has a history of disabilities. Now the question is, where do you start to look for these things? I like to look for it first during the mother's pregnancy. So this is a little bit easier to get when the children are younger, or the person is younger, and harder to get when the person is older coming in for a disability determination. So during the pregnancy, if the child is born premature, born at a low birth weight, or there's any problems during the delivery, they would be more at risk for developing some problems as they get older cognitively. So that's the first place that I'm looking for. And then I'm looking for, was there any delays in their development? So motor delays, language delays, or social delays. One of the questions that I always like to ask is, when the child was 4 years old, could people other than yourselves understand him? And if the answer is no to that, well, you know that the child had some problems in their language development, which would impact their academic and learning, and also impact their social functioning. Mm-hmm. Does someone have a question? Oh, I thought someone had a question. So that's the first place that I'm looking at, really before the age of 5. And you find with individuals with some disabilities that you're really going to see in that early developmental period that they had some significant cognitive or learning or social difficulties that also make them more at risk for developing some emotional problems as they get older. So when that's present, it's pretty safe to say that there was a neurodevelopmental disorder present in the early developmental period. And that speaks volumes in a forensic evaluation if you can document that. Because if you're bringing something like that into court, you're saying, well, this person had these problems throughout their life. They had them before the age of 5. These were these particular problems, okay? And then you start to look at how these problems manifest as they get older. And the first markers of this are their first job. Well, their first job is preschool, right? You have to go to preschool, you got to listen to your teachers, you got to interact with your peers, and you got to learn some things. So how do they do in preschool? And what I want to know is, what are the teachers saying about the child? So when you're talking to a parent in this case, you ask the parent about what the teachers were saying at that time, and you're collecting some good collateral information about the child's functioning in that real early developmental period. And as you get into elementary school, this is really where you see the first disability determinations, if the child wasn't already classified before, around the age of 3 to 5. But if the child wasn't classified and they get into kindergarten and the teachers are identifying a significant problem that leads to some type of child study team evaluation, well, there's your evidence right there of a documented lifelong disability, essentially, because the child had problems early on, and now they're being identified in elementary school. And you find out what the classifications were. So what type of learning disorder did they have? What type of classification in school did they have? And what services they were receiving. And that's really important in any type of disability determination, I think, when you're writing something that's going to be brought for benefits within the state, is to document that period. And if you have records that are going back that far back, that's going to be really helpful, because now it's not Dr. Dranoff said so. It's, well, listen, I'm just relying on these records here. Oh, yes. I think someone has a question. Got to unmute.
I'm seeing if I can unmute her myself. Right. I'm not sure. If you have a question, you should go ahead and you can unmute yourself if you need to. It's usually the little red microphone button with the slash through it. You would want to just click on that to do so.
And chime in whenever you're ready, whenever that gets figured out. Okay. So as you're looking at that early developmental period and you're starting to document usually the child's functioning, or even an adult if you want to go that far back, you're doing it through the records, through the collateral interviews, usually with the parents, and you're trying to ground your opinion in some kind of lifelong disability. And it should be fairly clear, or not so, if there's really no evidence of it, that speaks, volumes in itself. But typically people who are coming in who have real disabilities will have a history of this. And it's very important to get that information, not just through a test, but actually through the records and the collateral interviews, but primarily the records. So this brings us to, middle school and high school. Did this person also have these problems in middle school and in high school? And did they worsen? And usually around this time, there's going to be some kind of psychological or cognitive testing that was done, which now is going to give you psychometric testing scores to also ground your opinion in. So did the person get evaluated? Was there a diagnosis? What was the person's IQ? Was there any other problems in cognitive functioning in the areas of attention or memory or executive functioning? And what was the person's classification in school? And what services were they receiving? And on top of that, did they have to go to any kind of psychotherapy or other type of intensive outpatient services due to helping them manage any kind of emotional or social problems? on top of any cognitive or learning problems. So as they get into middle school and high school, also what was their social functioning like? Were they able to make friends, which is very important as it applies to both school and working as an adult, their interpersonal function. After high school, did they graduate high school, and did they go to a program for kids 18 to 21? Did they go to college? What did they do? And then where are they working, and what kind of jobs have they had? And this is really where you're going to start to look at the history, their work history. Have they been able to work, and what's that been like, and where do they work right now? And the best way to get at that is talking to any previous employers or places that someone had volunteered, and you say, all right, well, what was the job? How did they do at the job? How did it end? Are they still working there? What do they need supervision? Do you need to watch them a lot? And if the answer is yes to those questions, and the answer is yes to having a neurodevelopmental disorder, well, you're really starting to see someone who has a disability that's impacting them, their ability to not only complete school, but also to work as an adult. And in my opinion, that really becomes a disability. And the person would need some kind of services or benefits. And without those, the person would have a lot of trouble living independently. Okay. So the diagnostic considerations in youth and adulthood kind of piggyback off that idea. Was there a neurodevelopmental disorder when they were a child? And has that developmental disorder impacted their functioning as they progress through their formal schooling? And has it impacted their work and their social life as they've gotten older? And you'll see this sometimes in autism spectrum disorders with intellectual impairment. You'll see the problems in the early developmental period. Okay? You'll see the problems in school. They'll be receiving services. They'll be receiving services from the public schools post-high school, and they'll have some issues related to work. It gets a little bit more tricky when someone has an autism spectrum disorder without intellectual impairment and without language impairment, because they don't have the deficits that someone would have with the intellectual functioning impairments and the language impairments. So at face value, the person might seem to be higher functioning, but if you start to look at their social functioning, that's really where the impairment might be. And it's very clear that that would impact someone in their work performance, because a big part of work is to interact with other people. So we talked about cognitive and academic functioning over the years and how that's documented. We talked about social functioning. And then the other thing I like to really look at is the socioeconomic status. Has this person had a lot of resources, or have they not had a lot of resources? And independent of whether or not they're coming from a higher or lower socioeconomic status, have they been able to perform at a higher level over time, or has their functioning been kind of consistent even with some services that have been put into place? So after we get all that information from the records, the interviews with the person, and the collateral interviews, what we want to do is the cognitive assessment. And the cognitive assessment is really important because this is really where you're going to see documented deficits. So if a person doesn't have a lot of records and there's not a lot of people to talk to, you're going to have to develop some way to assess them cognitively. And the way that you do this is through the neuropsychological assessment. And a neuropsychological assessment is giving tests that look at a variety of cognitive functions, personality, and any kind of psychological symptoms. And if it's in a forensic context, you're also going to want to have a test of effort as part of the battery of tests that you give, meaning how much effort did this person put into the testing? So the first test that you give are the verbal and nonverbal reasoning tests. So if I asked you, how two things are alike, if you say, how is a pool and an ocean alike? Right? both swim in them. That would be a measure of verbal reasoning. A measure of nonverbal reasoning takes away the language component and really requires you to solve a puzzle non-verbally, essentially. Verbal reasoning is more related to how you're going to do in reading and writing, and nonverbal reasoning is more related to how you're going to do in math. However, as someone gets older, the reading classes and language classes like history and language arts, as well as the math classes, they all become more abstract, and you have to rely more on your nonverbal reasoning as well. So you're looking at the relationships between lots of different things. So someone might have good verbal functioning as a child and not have as much impairment in reading. But as they get older, if they have problems in the nonverbal reasoning component, they're going to have some difficulties in reading, as well as, when they get into high school and, they're in their 10th grade English class and everything becomes a little bit more abstract. That can become harder. The verbal and non-reasoning scores really look at this idea of general reasoning. Can they reason through something verbally and non-verbally? Okay. Essentially, their IQ and how smart they are, okay, compared to a sample of, of a specific population. Scores around 100 are in the average range. And that means they're as good as everyone else. Scores below 90 means that they're a little bit, weaker than everyone else. Scores above 110, they're a little bit stronger. As the scores get lower to the 80s and to the 70s, this really becomes significant weaknesses in their reasoning skills. So their intellectual functioning is not as high as other people. When you start to dip below 70, this is when someone might be diagnosed with an intellectual disability. Sometimes people will come in and their IQ is around 75, 80, okay? But they don't meet the criteria really for an intellectual disability in terms of the IQ. But this person still clearly has some cognitive impairments. So this is why there were some changes made in the diagnostic manual. So intellectual disabilities are no longer diagnosed based just on someone's IQ. So it used to be if you had an IQ of below 70, that was a big part of being diagnosed with a intellectual disability. Nowadays, it's really based on their adaptive functioning. So if there's problems in adaptive functioning, but problems in adaptive function usually go along with lower IQs. Okay. So it's not enough to just do an IQ test. You also want to get measures of their attention and their memory and their executive functioning. Because if someone has deficits in these areas, despite their reasoning skills, they're going to have some cognitive problems that are going to impact them either in academic, occupational, or their social functioning. So the first one is working memory. So can you remember things in your short-term memory? If I tell you something or I give you some kind of direction, can you remember that? Or do you kind of forget what I say immediately? That's working memory. Now, visual processing and discrimination, people get into this idea of processing speed and how fast you process something. The way we test for processing really is doing something very simple fast. So it's not just how fast you do a nonverbal reasoning tasks. It's not, because that would be confounded with the tasks of the nonverbal reasoning. Visual processing really is doing something very, very simple fast. And individuals who can do something simple fast can do relatively simple tasks. And if you have problems on those tasks, doing something very easy simply, well, we're going to speak a little bit to your functioning at work, because you can't even do a relatively simple task. Okay. So attention, there's a couple of different types of attention. You have sustained attention, selective attention, and divided attention. The way I assess for sustained attention is I give them a really boring task that goes on for about 14 minutes. And can they pay attention to that task, or are they not able to really sit there and stay focused? Selective attention is when you're paying attention to something and ignoring something else. And dividing attention is when you're dividing your task, usually between something that's auditory and something that is visual. So can you divide your attention between these two things? So difficulties in attention are going to create a specific cognitive impairments that would affect work and your disability status, I think. The only issue becomes is that people with attention problems it could also be due to either depression or anxiety. So when you see attention problems without also deficits in the verbal and nonverbal reasoning, that could be due possibly to depression or anxiety or another condition. So typically, if you're having the problems in the verbal and nonverbal reasoning, you're also going to see deficits in working memory and attention as well. Sometimes you're going to see verbal reasoning and nonverbal reasoning intact, but then you're going to see deficits in the attention and the working memory. That's something you often see in autism spectrum disorder without intellectual impairment and without language impairment. But there's still cognitive processes that are impaired. The next thing you're going to look at is learning and memory. So you're looking at verbal memory and you're looking at visual spatial memory. And this really gets into how the person learns. Are they more of a visual learner or are they more of a verbal learner? If there's deficits in verbal and nonverbal reasoning, you're also probably going to see some problems with learning and memory. So now, as you're building this case of what's going on with the person, you have all this collateral information, remember, from the records and from the collateral witness interviews and your clinical interview with this person. Now you're corroborating everything through this testing. So not only were they in a multiply disabled classroom and they had a wide range of disabilities pretty much before the age of 5. Now, right now, when you're testing them at, let's say, 25 years old, there's clear deficits in their reasoning and in their working memory and in visual processing, different aspects of attention, and their learning memory. So it's easier for you to say, or you have more evidence for to show that this person has clear deficits in a variety of areas still. And if you really wanted to take it to the next step, you would observe them either at work or at home and see what they're able to do. I could think of one case that I did recently where I went out to the house and I did an observation of what the person can do, and that really helped, for me to understand a big part of their disability. Okay. So the next method is executive functioning. So you're looking at planning, organization, error detection, error correction, and these again are done on tests. Difference between the other areas of functioning and the executive functioning is that you can also give rating scales on executive functioning. So you can have the parents or a caregiver rate them on a lot of these different executive functioning tasks. So are they able to plan? Are they able to stay organized? Are they able to kind of carry on throughout the day without getting distracted and overwhelmed? And you can get some collateral information. I tend to do that a lot in my disability cases where I don't just rely on a pencil paper test for executive functioning, but I rely on the rating scales from the collateral witnesses. One thing I hope I'm getting across today is the importance of the collateral witnesses and the information you get from them. Any questions so far?
I do know somebody was trying to type in a question, but it hasn't come in yet. She said she was trying to type it to me. If she wants, you can go ahead and, like I said, unmute if that helps to be able to ask your question.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm gonna keep going. If anyone has a question, just let me know. So that's the cognitive assessment. So the cognitive assessment is important. You're looking at the person's intellectual functioning. But really, I think what the court is going to want to know, and any judge who's looking at a case, is going to want to know, how is this impacting their daily functioning? Because it's not enough to just say, oh, this person has their IQ is 80. Okay, well, that's below average. But there's people with 80 IQs that are able to do lots of different things and able to work and carry on with their life. Why is this person not able to do this? Why does this person have a disability? And what you're going to do is you're going to look at their adaptive functioning. In my opinion, there really should be a separate section of the report, and this should be a big part of the argument around the disability. How is it impacting their ability to function in different aspects of life? Okay, so the big three are communication, taking care of yourself, which we call daily living, okay, and socialization. And if there's deficits in these three areas, it's very likely that this person will have trouble maintaining gainful employment. So if they're not understanding what people are saying, if they're not able to express themselves both verbally and in writing, that's a significant problem in adaptive functioning, because that's a really big part of work or of school to be able to do that. Likewise, if they have problems in their personal functioning, in their household, and their ability to navigate the community, this is going to be a pretty significant point that you're going to make in a disability evaluation, meaning that the person has trouble getting dressed in the morning, or trouble navigating the transportation, or dealing with money, or they're not able to drive because they can't really understand that. Well, it's clear they have problems in adaptive functioning, because most of us can do those things. Okay, so communication, problems in daily living, and then the socialization part. This starts to come out a little bit more with people who are disabled from mental health conditions like depression, pretty serious depression, because they have problems in interpersonal functioning, they have problems in their leisure activities, and they have coping deficits that are going to impact their functioning in a wide variety of areas. And these cases are a little bit harder to explain why the socialization piece makes them disabled. But I've been in cases where I've made opinions that someone has a history of depression that makes them disabled. And I'll tell you why in some of these cases I've said that. Typically, there's a history of hospitalizations or intensive outpatient programs that have made them not able to manage themselves within the community. So this daily living piece comes into play. They're not able to manage themselves in the community. They have problems in interpersonal relationships. And maybe they don't have language deficits or real problems with communication, but they clearly have adaptive function deficits in their ability to manage themselves in the community and interpersonal relationships that are clearly going to affect their ability to sustain and maintain long-term employment and basically be able to take care of themselves. So I think it's easy to say in some of those cases that there is clear problems in adaptive functioning. So academic assessment. I always like to put this in as part of my battery of tests. It's just another area that I can assess for. Typically, this is a little bit more important in individuals who have the neurodevelopmental disorders and have a long history of developmental and learning problems, because I'm saying, all right, not only do they have problems in their cognitive functioning and their adaptive functioning, well, here is your first functional impairment, their ability to acquire basic academic skills. So in individuals who have these documented disabilities, I like to add this in because it shows further proof of problems in reading, and problems in math, and problems in writing that are all related to working as an adult. And if there's any other evaluators who have done something or have given an opinion, the more work that you do, the better. The more data points that you give, either you're the attorney who hired you or you provide to the court, the better your evaluation will come across to the court. Because you're not going to say, all right, I gave him a cognitive test and I interviewed him. Okay. And then I came up with this opinion. Well, they're going to say, well, did you talk to this person? Did you talk to that person? Did you get any records? Okay. That becomes a big problem. So if you're looking for an evaluator, the first thing you want to know is about the 5 methods of data collection. You want to know if he's going to look at records. You want to know if he's going to interview the person. How many collateral interviews are you going to do? Is there going to be neuropsychological testing with academic achievement testing? And what kind of direct observation is the person going to do? Are they going to do an observation at the home, or are they going to just do an observation in the office? The issue is it becomes a lot of work to do one of these evaluations. So you got to really put in a lot of effort, but you only really get one chance to really document this stuff, and you really want to document it well. And if you know that it is going into court, into some kind of legal proceeding regarding disability benefits, you want to make sure that you have an evaluation that really looks at everything. Because if your evaluator goes in to testify, you want to make sure that he has the most information in the room. And the times that I've gone into these procedures or proceedings, I've always had the most information, because the judge doesn't have the information, the lawyer doesn't probably have all the information, right? Because they're not a psychologist. The parents don't have all the information because they're not, mental health professional. And maybe the evaluator on the other side has some information. The evaluator for the state may have some information, but he's going to be missing a wide range of things that he may not have, particularly the collateral witness interviews. So when you go in there with all this information and people start asking you questions, well, you really got a good handle on this person and on this case. And finally, psychological symptoms. So if someone doesn't really have the history of developmental problems, they may have a history of psychological problems, such as psychosis or bipolar-related conditions or depressive disorders, etc. And the same thing you're going to do with the psychosocial history you're going to do with this person. You're going to look at, when did these problems start coming into play? Okay, well, they were hospitalized when they were 7 years old. And then they were hospitalized again when they were 12 years old for depression. Now you have this history that's gone on over time. And now as an adult, they're depressed, they're having problems working. This is, even though they don't have the intellectual impairments and maybe not serious adaptive functioning impairments, they may have trouble managing themselves in the community and managing themselves in a work environment, which also, I think, leads to some kind of long-term disability. While depression can get better, and it does get better for a lot of people, someone who's had depression throughout the course of their life, it seems to be a little bit more pervasive of who they are as a person and the difficulties that they have had. Okay, and that really needs to be teased apart more, I think, even more so when there's not the intellectual impairment, and documenting depression or other psychological conditions that can be a disability. You're really going to need records. You're going to need a lot of collateral interviews and other things. I've seen that. I've been involved in cases where someone who's had depression was denied for benefits. And then when we kind of explained everything, we really looked at the case, it was very clear and it was eventually approved. Because you're really looking at the history of the problem over time, not just, all right, is this person have a cognitive disability or not? It's more than that. And I think if I'm giving you anything today, is the importance of looking at 5 different methods of data collection, looking at the person's history over the course of their life, impairments in academic, occupational, and social functioning throughout the lifespan, and documenting that and corroborating it with psychological testing. So the best thing you can do is, when you're talking to a potential evaluator, take it away from the testing, because the testing is only a part of the of the picture, and information really needs to be collected from other methods of data collection. Any questions? That's all I have today.
Dr. Dranoff, I have a question. You mentioned the the evaluation that you get from the state. What sort of areas do you see that those are lacking in? Obviously, what you're doing is very comprehensive, and it's looking at a lot of different points where it corroborates the information, and that's, I think, really important when you're putting together a case. But sort of where, a lot of times parents, reach out to us that they're frustrated about this because it doesn't reflect what's accurately going on.
Right. So what do I see? I see a IQ test done and maybe a measure of adaptive functioning,
Okay.
and no collateral interviews, and no real record review. Sometimes there is, and a brief explanation. That's generally what I what I see. And if you're someone who's doing this who has a doctorate, writing a 5 to 10 page report shouldn't take that long, and you should do your due diligence to a case. But sometimes I think that they have a lot of probably have a lot of work, and I see short reports, and I see sometimes that they're missing the collateral interviews. And to me, these are forensic evaluations, and the hallmark of a forensic evaluation is the collateral witness interviews and the record review. That's a big part of it.
How early on in the process should a family reach out, for this type of evaluation? Like, wait till they're denied benefits, or if they think they're going for benefits?
It depends on how much, how much evidence you want to put into your package. So I've had families come to me in the beginning. I've had families come to me when they're, when they were rejected from these benefits. So it all depends on when you want to know about it. But I really want to emphasize the importance of getting a more, not comprehensive in terms of the testing, comprehensive in terms of the procedures, the records that the person's going to use, the interviews of other people. That's, for me, that seems to be the most important when I go to court. They want to know who else I talk to, always.
And how much time does that take you, just generally speaking? Like, obviously, probably depends on the amount of people involved and the amount of people you need to contact, but general.
Not a lot of time. Talking to someone's psychiatrist, 15 minutes tops, if you can get that. Talking to a teacher, 10 minutes. Sending them a rating scale takes me 2 seconds. I send them it through the internet now. They complete it. It comes to me. I integrate it into my report. But the importance of that information that took me basically a half hour to do is just as important as any test that I give the actual person. That collateral information in a legal context. If you're just doing it for your own general knowledge and you're not bringing it into court, you don't really need to do the collateral interviews. It's an important part of, I think, of forensic work to do.
We have a question that came in over the chat. Is, do you recommend this kind of evaluation for someone who's exiting high school around age 21?
Yes, especially if they don't have disability services at that point. Because from what I've seen, sometimes children are starting to do a lot better as they get through these programs, and their IQs, go up, and they're doing a whole lot better. And it needs to be documented, especially for disability services, that there was a problem. And just the fact is, if they're in a program from 18 to 21, to me, that seems consistent with a disability, because you had to go to a life skills program and a program to help with adaptive functioning. And that program might help. But after the 18 to 21 program, there may be still deficits that need to be documented as an adult. But unless you need it for some kind of legal purpose, I don't know if you need it for a clinical purpose, just for your general knowledge. I mean, from my experience, the parents really know the child really well at that point. But if you need it for a legal purpose, this kind of evaluation, I think, would be really important to document, because it's documented they're functioning as an adult. And if they're 45 years old and you have this report, I mean, if I evaluate someone at 20 years old and you come to me 25 years later and I will still have that report, I just do a follow-up, even if all this time has passed, because I have everything documented, their whole psychosocial history, their current functioning at 20, and then I just do an assessment around their work functioning as an adult and their social functioning as an adult. And if something came up when they're 45, it would be kind of an easy type evaluation.
Does anybody else have questions for the chat feature? Or like I said, feel free to unmute yourself if that's easier to ask the question specifically. Oh, somebody here has, somebody raised their hand.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
My question is going on to what was just answered. Now, when it comes to this kind of evaluation, does insurance pay for it? Does the state pay for it, or the parent has to pay for it?
The parent would pay for it. It's my experience that insurance companies generally don't cover these types of evaluations because they're for a legal purpose.
Okay.
So you might spend a little bit more money on the front end, but you're going to get what you need to go into the legal proceeding with.
Okay.
And if you're hiring an expert, you need a lawyer first. And then if you also hire an expert and you get a good expert report where someone's ready to go in and testify, that's what you need in a legal case. And the evaluator needs to be, credible and give a good opinion that's not spun. And if they go in with a good opinion, you're going to be in good shape, if it makes a lot of sense. And if you have this amount of information, because it's hard to argue it. You got it in so many different areas. You got it in the cognitive function. You got it in the adaptive function. You got it in the academic function. You got it in the psychological functioning. You see it in the records. You talk to people. You gave those people rating scales. You've seen them. So you got a lot of information.
Okay, another question. You were saying, I see that you emphasize records. If a parent has records from when they were younger, when, let's say, IEPs and R&R reports, is that good also?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
If I can get every IEP and every evaluation that's been done on a child that's documented some type of disability within the school, I can really ground my opinion in that. Because if someone asks me, oh, well, do they have a history of a disability? Well, I can say this sentence. I can say, I have reviewed every IEP from when they're from kindergarten
Perfect.
to 12th grade. It is documented in my report the child was in a multiply disabled classroom, which is a disability as a child. For that reason, that person is more likely to have a disability as an adult and have trouble maintaining or obtaining and maintaining gainful employment. That's going to be hard to argue with, right? Because not only that, I have the testing, I have all these collateral interviews. It starts to kind of add up here. And you don't need a report that's 40 pages either. When you start to make a very succinct argument and you show your procedures.
Okay.
When they see your procedures, this is what I did. I met with them this many times. I have all these records. And then you write maybe like a 10-page report.
Okay.
And you talk about your opinion. And you ground your opinion in this extensive data collection process. Well, now you have a report that someone might read. The thing I often see is people write these long reports where you can't read them and you can't really understand what they did.
Okay.
Because it's too long. They're explaining things that no one understands. and it's not straight and to the point.
Right.
You want to get someone who focuses less on the actual report. I mean, you want to focus on the report too, but really on the data collection and the information that he knows about the person to formulate the opinions, and then to document that into reports. One of the things that I like to do in my reports is when I talk about the collaterals, let's say I have like 6 collaterals, I do everyone in like a long paragraph that someone's going to read, and I synthesize all the information that I want to get from that person. And it makes it more likely the person's going to read a page and a half with 6 collaterals. So if a judge is reading that, or an attorney even reads it from the other side, they're going to say, all right, well, look, I see what this guy did. And the attorney is going to be like, uh-oh. We see what, he's talked to a lot of people. He's talked to more people than I know. He seems to have a lot of information, and it seems to be supported in a lot of different areas.
Now, would you take the parents, like of because I'm one to have all the IEPs, or do you want it straight from the school?
No, I could take it straight from the parents. That's fine.
Perfect.
I prefer it straight from the parents.
Thank you.
I mean, the document's the document.
Right, because we got it from the school.
Yeah, I mean, the IEP, but you know what I don't want? I don't want their homework assignment from math class.
Right.
You can't really do it. I want like documents. I want like a document signed by a licensed professional. I want a document signed by a school. I want a record from a therapist, or a letter from a therapist.
Right.
That's where I start to ground my opinions in really good records.
Well, thank you. That was very informational. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. I'm happy that you enjoyed it, and I think it's an important thing for people to know how these evaluations should be done, because honestly, doing an evaluation this way takes more work than meeting with someone to do a couple of tests and writing up test results. But from my experience, the courts are not that impressed with just the test results. They're more impressed with the records and the collaterals.
And that's certainly on our end questions. Parents come to us and they say, hey, this is a very expensive process to do this. What's the value to my case? And we talk to them very much about it's a minimal cost up front when you're talking about, making sure your son or daughter has the services that they need based on their disability. And so that's a long-term problem that you're taking care of. And the value of putting in a comprehensive report that opposing counsel gets it and questions and says, okay, this is going to drive us toward maybe a settlement discussion ahead of time before we have to even go to trial. That's very, very beneficial, very helpful. And then if you have to go,
I've had ones where I go in to testify, and then they probably eventually read the report when I'm there, and then it settles. Because the report is not too long. It's you structure it in a way that everyone can see what you did, and you talk about your opinion and say why there's a disability here. And these take a while. So at least take me a while. They take me like 2 months. To do one of these, because you got to reach out to the collaterals, you got to do the testing, a lot of different steps along the way to collect the information.
Well, thank you very much for all this information. If no one has any other questions, we wait around for a couple more minutes. Happy to, have any questions.
If anyone has any other questions.
Yeah. In the meantime, I just want to remind everyone, a couple people I know came in a little bit late, that if you haven't signed up tonight, our keynote address is being delivered by the former New Jersey Supreme Court Justice Helen E. Hones. It's focusing on autism after COVID-19, navigating a world where everything's changed and nothing's changed. It's going to be a great presentation. We're looking forward to that. We also have sessions tomorrow as well on a variety of different topics. But on behalf of Hinkle, Pryor, and Fisher, I want to thank everyone for attending our virtual Parent Empowerment Conference, and a huge thank you to Dr. Dranoff for educating us and really just giving us a comprehensive look at what goes into these reports.
Well, thanks everyone for having me. I really enjoyed talking to everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for watching this encore presentation from the Fall 2020 Hinkle, Pryor & Fisher Parent Empowerment Conference. With 24 other presentations to view, there is plenty of additional information to help you become empowered. As a reminder, the information contained in this video is not a substitute for individual legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. Copyright 2020 Hinkle, Pryor & Fisher, PC, Attorneys at Law. All rights reserved.